your ability to keep dipping in and celebrating Mother Earth in the United States and Mexico and back to the United States.
Reciban un cordial saludo de la nación zapoteca ancestral. Please receive greetings from an ancestral nation, Zapotec. It is quite an honor to have the opportunity to share my work with all of you. It is great to be in your space. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Well, that's a great big question. And what is Mother Earth to me? To me, Mother Earth is my altar. I'm an extension of nature, and that is what's part of the ecosystem. That's what's Mother Earth for me. I am part of it, and I'm an extension.
When you talk about moving and how very important the soil, the botanicals, the bugs, the essence of your color, and the beauty, the topography of your land, and what has inspired you, and other artists over millennia. How do you take that from where you were and either use it in your art or somehow build upon it in your new place in the United States?
I think migration, diaspora, does things to people that has experienced that it's very complicated. It is definitely it either contributes, it either complicates your identity, and even the bigger question is, what's your place in time and history as indigenous person, but also being an immigrant. So my art has enabled me to understand my identity. It gave me an opportunity to research myself and my ancestors, value, identity, and worldview. It's healing me. It is also reminding me, especially the plants. It reminded me, and I learned to listen to nature like my ancestor has done, and be guided by the plants. And expand the vocabulary of the designs and colors. So by migrating to a much more urban America, it enriching myself as an indigenous person, it enriching my work, and yes, build up on the teachings from my ancestors and my parents. And I understand that, we have a physical border, and the border and the Owens Treaty, and made the walls possible, is that yes, they're physical, but also they did a great job to also put a mental wall for the society. And so much of what I speak about, it's about land-based. So when I say I listen and learn from the plants, because a lot of the plants that we could think only grows in Oaxaca, it also grows in Southern California where I live. The nopales, carrizo, yashi, garcin, so many plants that I only even know them only in my native language. They grow there wildly. So if I could listen to them and could be guided by them, they tell me that I'm at home. Out of all these time trying to find myself in this complexity of immigrants, in fact, as indigenous people, we refer to ourselves as migrants, not immigrants, because we've always migrated up and down the Americas. have taught me and reminded me that I'm at home. And my work could live where they grow, naturally.
One of the most beautiful things you said in an earlier conversation was, we are struggling, we cross the border, struggle to find our identity. And then we forget that our home is in our head. Our head is in our home. Our home is in our head. You know, our house is in our head. Our head is our house.
Yeah.
I think that's how you said it. Our head is our house. Yeah. But the idea that the loss is manageable. We as artists can somehow manage a cultural loss or a physical loss of the past, filling it with something that reminds us of it, or if not, it's exactly the same as it was where we were. So the plants, the same plants growing. Yet you have stimulus in California that completely changed your art. The migration completely changed your dimension. And you're standing next to this beautiful indigo, right?
Yes.
Only half the room can see. But you talk to me about the contemporary aspect of this work and the connections between there and here and here and there. And the seamlessness, but also space.
You know, what is tradition? What's tradition? In this art form and in my tradition, in my culture, to me tradition is changed tremendously, and I almost had I almost paused early 60s into early 70s when a more commercial making of textiles started in our village and in Oaxaca, and I think all Mexico. What we know today of tradition, that is actually very recent. And
give us a little bit finer example of what you mean by commercial and tradition.
so in the 60s, we had the blessing of having visitors arriving in Oaxaca and interviewing one of the first wholesalers of textiles that arrived in Tepetlan, 1972. So we had the blessing to other people to recognize the talent of our villagers, specifically with textiles. Prior to that, the exchanging or the selling of our weavings were always local. There were blankets, there weren't rugs, and that's where people or the community still have a lot of decisions to make with one piece. They weren't oppressed by a market or by the wholesaler or by a souvenir or by fast and cheap making anything. They were still having the culture integrity. And so when this new opportunity came, it brought two things. The blessing of having a more opportunity of income, but also the standardized of an industry of textile making that's heavily looking for something cheap, fast, and repetitive, and it took away my ability to imagine. That market did.
Wow.
But it's also a blessing because it helps to put food on the table. When I interviewed the first wholesaler, he said his business practice he's proud that he brought a lot of work to the community and gave them economic opportunities. What he's not so proud of is that he didn't encourage creativity. So, when I think about tradition, prior to this market introduction, to me, bypassing that, that's tradition, or there's more tradition there. And that's what every day of my life and art practice, that's what I'm effort and aim to be connected to. Because that's where the integrity, the cultural value, and the connection to the worldview and respect to nature through the color, the symbolism of everything we make and how we view the world is still connected to. That's what I'm actually aim to be connected to every day in all what I do.
We're sitting here in a room, large room filled with work from all around the world. And these artists, like Porfirio, are the finest in their respective countries, in their fields. And what's really very difficult for so many of them is the challenges they face just trying to create, just trying to do what they're compelled to do. And some of the circumstances are so difficult that they've had to migrate. To the left, there's it was to the left. We repositioned it. Moving things around. Anyway, we have work from a tribe, the Hunan tribe, for example, in Colombia, that and Panama, that it straddles two borders. Many of the Hunan, for an array of reasons, human trafficking, gun running, rubber plantation, you name it. It's been disrupting this part of the world. And the idea that they can take their creativity and hold it through all this trauma and relocate into a city living in extreme poverty in the Gedjikanda, the really bad, just slums, because they've been run out of where they are. It's very hard for them to maintain that cultural integrity / creativity at the same time. And so many of these artists, for an array of reasons, are challenged to be able to do, much less have the luxury to create.
I think that is a story of so many's life, and we're just having that conversation early this morning with Anna and Jim Williams, who are kindly hosting me in their home. And there's always that need of an income, but also this soul fulfilling and the food of my soul in this case to create. And when you migrate, you don't have your fields, cornfields, you don't have the beans or squash, you don't have the harvest time anymore. Or you don't have your home, and home that has been there or connected to that land for thousands of years. You don't have that anymore. You now have a landlord that's expecting the check every month. You now have bills to pay, and then you're now oppressed and afraid of being homeless the next month. At the same time, you're trying to keep an integrity of natural dyes, of well-made, of great representative or your ancestors. You're trying to do that all at the same time, which if you think about it, I think, for me, in my personal opinion, my villagers are probably in a better position than I am. But these experiences has fueled my interest to work hard, to be able to learn things, and to be able to celebrate with all of you, and be able to create this kind of a conversation, because it is important to have, especially nowadays.
Well, now that your creativity is flowing, talk to us about some of your more special pieces here.
So, it is absolutely hard for me to
I'll
say.
choose one.
Okay,
The fourth in.
this one, which one, this one?
Yes.
So, when I think about, as I said earlier, what's tradition and how, what we know today as tradition, how it has developed. Some of the things that you might reference to as tradition might be something like this. This is a 1816 work thread to an inch. Work is the structure of the piece. The more work to an inch, the finer the piece is, the more detailed work you're able to do in a smaller space. So therefore, it takes a lot longer for something like this to be created.
Very tight.
Very tight, woven piece. And
Colors, where they derive from,
so the colors, the first here on top is Zapote Negro.
which is?
It is a fruit that it's high tannin source. And we can talk about the science and chemistry when it comes to colors, but it's a tannin source that has a reaction, especially when it becomes in contact with an iron source. And that's one of the most fast color that you can ever work with. So the rest is corn, which is a plant that's used for the yellow dyes, but also for medicine. And of course, all the reds that you see on the piece and all the pieces and some sort of a pink, rose pink, come from cochineal insect. So what I'm holding on my hands here,
And the blue?
and the blue, it's Indian, of course. Anil in Zapata. So what I wanted to say is that what we are holding here in our hands here, it is a time in history that can never be repeated. This is an imprint of the season, but it is a collection of a DNA of nature, that I'm holding on my hands here, that it can never be repeated. You could ask me to make another of these pieces, and I'm able to repeat, and you might not even know the difference. One thing that I cannot repeat is the time and history when this piece was made. And the reason why it registers a time and history, and it's because the colors, when you're working with nature, and when you collect your plants directly from nature, you start seeing the difference between one year to another, depending on the soil, depending on the side of the mountain that the plant were harvested. Does it receive a lot of sun or a lot of rain for the season? Now with climate change, we see these variations happening. Some of these plants are collected much more higher up in the mountains. Some of the colors are much more saturated than previous years. So you are experiencing these changes. So when you're harvesting, that is an imprint of the season. So when something like this, or work with this kind of integrity, it is almost impossible to put a price on it. And that's not even counting the labor, the physical labor that's going into creating something like this. Which means, in the face of production, in the face of today's meaning of production, fast and cheap, these are almost impossible to preserve anymore. Because I can't compete with the market today.
Nor should you. Who's got a question?
Beautiful.
A comment?
I got one here.
You got one there.
I got one.
And give us your name, sir.
I'm Tom Patton. Really enjoy your story.
Thank you.
And I'm thinking about this place that you have found yourself on this little blue marble that when you inhabit, you found a special spot. And you talked a little bit about the ability to imagine and you were moved by the cultures, and you're a self-made artist, but I gotta think that there's some influences that taught you, who are those people in your life that influenced your ability to see this place that you occupy in this multicultural world?
His name is Amado.
We had quite an interesting conversation about mothers earlier. Porfirio's mother is a healer, and if I may, and plants are of the essence. And I don't want to mess this up with my words, but my mother is also very much a plant person, horticulture. And we had this earlier connection about the influence of our mothers. Porfirio's mother is a serious healer who's an octogenarian, who's 80 years old, right? And has had a life of really, not for money, this is her calling and her must do. And I think much of that was infused into Porfirio, if I may.
Yeah. I hope we don't put these on YouTube. And her name is Andrea, which are my parents. They continue to preserve the ancestral worldview and learnings and understanding because they never went to Western school. So they kept the deep understanding of who we are and our nations and our ancestors' worldview and way of live and the respect towards nature and who we come from. So that's my school and that's my formation as an artist.
Question down there?
Oh, your work is beautiful.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Can you tell us who you are?
I'm Michelle Lunsford. How long does it take you to make that piece of jewelry?
How long,
This
she asked,
particular,
did it take to make this beautiful piece?
these took it took about 950 hours to make. And recently, for some of you that might be, I don't know, receive my emails or my social media. So I use those platforms to create a conversation and to engage conversations like this. And recently I was talking about economic values with the traditional work, traditional practices. And to make the rats you see on the pieces here, but let's just say this particular piece here. It took about 12 people to harvest about 1,000 leaves of prickly pear cactus to harvest the cochineal or to farm the cochineal insect that you see on these pieces. It takes about 60 to 70,000 insects to make 1 pound of dye stuff. And these people work for about 2 weeks, about 8 hours, 9 hours a day to harvest enough. Therefore, about 2 people or maybe 1 will care for these 1,000 leaves for 4 months. Once the insects are ready to be harvested, it will take them maybe 5 people in total to harvest enough to make something like this. Meanwhile, the rest of the plants, it's harvest. Then if it's a hand spun weaving yarn, it'll take another month to hand spin enough or something like this.
And the yarn is from,
It's sheep's wool.
is it a special type of sheep?
It's a blend of churro and merino. And it'll take, depending on the sheeps, it'll take between 2 years to 3 years before you can even shear them. When you add up the hours, it's almost 1,000. When you think the price, even if it's in the thousands, really we don't make anything. Right? And it'll take 13 to 15 people to make something like this. That's not counting my time designing or conceptualizing anything. It is just labor work that's involved to make one piece. 13 people. 13 people that it's waiting and hoping the success of the weavings. So that way they could take care of their family and they could also preserve their cultural traditions.
Was there a time when you did soup to nuts? You did it all? You did the botanical side, the weaving? How long would it take one person to do it?
1 year.
Little perspective.
Because I have to wait for the rain to fall. So let's say today, let's start a studio. Okay, let's go ahead and start a studio and we work it with this integrity. The first thing we need to do is wait for the rain to fall so that plants could grow and so that way I could collect the yarn. Meanwhile, then we'll find the sheep, hopefully they're ready to be sheared. We shear them, then we'll go ahead and start doing all the spinning, then the washing, the spinning, and then finally start getting to dye the yarn. But that happens in so many different times of the year, so that you can only collect in certain part of the year. You can only collect these other plants in certain other part of the year. Some of these plant grows in the garden, so it's available. So those are the steps you need to take before you can actually start to weave the piece. And just to weave the piece, something like this, it could take about a month because it's so fine and therefore it's hard on your back, so you can only weave maybe a couple inches or maybe 5-4 inches a day.
What is the loom?
The loom is a threadle, it's a frame walking loom, as they say. That is something you stand in, so you integrate it with the tool when you're weaving. So, but also it is also important, and if I may just add, so when we think about the price for the pieces, you also, when you purchase one, you invest in the preservation, you invest in the climate, you invest, forget about the tradition, you actually invest in our chance as humanity in this world. This piece goes back to nature and not to disintegrate, and would only go back to its natural form.
Not for a while.
Not for and
There's a 3-year guarantee on it.
so these if one piece used on the rug, it'll last between 20 to 30 years. If it's used on the floor as rug, if it's on the wall as an art piece, it'll last over 100 years. So you're buying one piece that's going to be used by your children and your grandchildren. Therefore, you're buying less. So you don't need to buy, we'd love for you to buy all these pieces for your home, but you don't need to buy as what we're used to, the cheaper and faster consumer way.
What, Porfirio, are you making of the increasing, ever increasing use of indigenous, tribal, ethnic works into very commercial, very streamlined products? A little applique here on a Target shirt, or a little leather flourish there. I was talking to somebody earlier tonight about the Aspen Art, I don't know, bastardizing the name, but the Aspen Institute does a wonderful job on examining, you may know this, artists, of course you know this, artisans and their ability to act cleanly and effectively in a very, very dirty commercial world. It's very hard. So there are a lot of artists like Porfirio whose designs, whose works are picked up by big time houses, production houses. And I just wonder how that looks to you and how that feels to you.
Well, I think it is a behavior that does not allow us to be seen as human. It is a behavior that that does not allow indigenous people to be looked as something that can be respected. You know, we think as indigenous people, they have no say, they have no voice. So many exploitation happens around, you know, these topics. And it's just simple as, which is us as society, we have not been able to respect each other as human and look at each other as equal. And that's, I think that's it. There's no respect.
Anybody have any comment or, I'm looking at Natalie.
Natalie Troska. I just love for you to talk about another piece if you might.
Oh, indeed.
Absolutely.
You can choose your favorite.
You know,
I love this one.
if I may, I'll expand a little bit. I have been, what you see here, I consider more of my functional work.
What does that mean?
They could be used as on the floor. They could be used on a coffee table. You could put them in a bedspread on the foot of a bed. You could put them on a table, on the wall. You could even wear them, they're kind of heavy. And so these are work that it could actually be used. Some are much more finer, some much more, you know, a little bit more thicker. This particular piece, for instance, it is,
Where's your signature?
it's
Porfirio
on this side.
signs each work, and it's quite nice.
So, it is, so this piece goes that way, if you would just hold it. So this is part of a series that's called Fragments. Fragments. So it looks into the Serapis. It's a Dio Serapis that was developed when the Spanish arrived in Mexico and the indigenous people of Mexico started to develop this style of weaving. The prominent, I believe the classic period was 1750 to 1830s. They're really fine pieces, and so I was
Walk us through some of the iconography.
So in the sarape especially, you either see a diamond center or you see a medallion. And you see quite a bit of that influence from the Moorish. Otherwise, the diamonds, what you also see is very common in the indigenous culture of Mexico. So that's what you see here.
Are they symbolic?
The most, what I say, reference that I have, or that we have as culture with the diamond shape are Ojo de Dios. And then you see butterflies, are these designs here. And to me, and through my research and understanding the sacredness of the food, corn, beans, and squash, that's what represents the dots that you see around this piece. And so it is, I normally start like in series, and this is more of an ongoing series of pieces, so this is one of the fragments piece. And this here is a more traditional design, I would say this is a great representation of a great master piece when it comes to tradition. So these I could say is easily over 1,000 hours. But when it comes to natural dyeing too, it is the easiest way to know natural or chemical dyes is the richness and the subtlety of the colors. And also how many pieces is available for sale, because I can only make so many pieces. But that's one of the most common questions. How do I know it's chemical or natural dyes? And those are some of the things that you'll be able to.
Any other ways you can tell whether, I mean, in terms of testing or like just the average person?
The average person, I think the easiest way is to learn what people do and do not pay so much attention what they say they do. Is to learn what they do, to learn their integrity and get to know them. If you're collecting a piece, but if you're just buying a rug, there's no need to. I don't think there's no need to look into that. And this is an original design.
Now this is very contemporary. No?
Yes, so this is an original design. And
Beautiful.
this is expanding the vocabulary of the traditional designs that you see so much in the walls of Mitla. I don't know if some of you has been to Oaxaca, a lot of the designs, this is expanding the vocabulary of that. And this is, I guess you could say, this is the influence or the enrichment of diaspora and urban America. And this is some of the things that I
When we originally talked about this design, you were talking about highways. You were talking about highways and open space versus, and then buildings and cities, urban areas.
Yeah, some of the things that really caught my attention when I arrived here, I worked for many years at construction. I actually used to drive a cement truck. And I started to visit homes, especially in Ojai, mid-century modern home that later on I learned more about. It's the simplicity of these architecture. And I grew up around architectural buildings like Mitla, like Montalban, these very linear and clean buildings. And I really connected with those and the lights and the colors and the style of this era. So I was really attached and moved by those buildings' simplicity. And later on, little by little, I build on into the tradition and creating works like this. But also, I have created work others than for instance, like this. This is another piece that is. You saw this piece earlier. I'm sorry, the design on these traditional piece, the Grecas or the cycle of life. But this is my interpretation. So in many ways, I'm reinterpreting traditional textiles. And one of the questions early here on the table was, what do I think around modernizing traditional designs? And for me, I'm not modernizing them. As indigenous people of today, this is how I'm engaging with my tradition. My intention is not to modernize something. This is just how we create, and we're engaging with modern society.
Interesting, this is not dyed, except for the red, of course. These sheep come in many colors, right? So
That's what, I'm sorry?
Looms.
Absolutely. Prior to the conquest, my ancestor was using a backstrap loom. It's a loom that's attached to your waist and into a tree, into a pole.
Punishing.
Okay, yeah, and it's,
It's nice.
and it's, that's how the weaving were done. And so when the Spanish arrived, they brought the frame loom. It's also known as Spanish loom, which is at first, essentially, it's grabbing the backstrap loom and putting it into the loom. It's still weaving techniques that were very similar to the backstrap technique. And with time and changes and evolutions, now our technique, it's a tapestry weaving technique with only 2 harnesses. But those things has definitely changed over time.
Shelley Morgan.
Frank Delaney. As you know, I was curious because, you were reflecting on your heritage and how you learned. Do you have apprentices and others with learning from you to keep this going?
So the people that are involved in the studio, I want to say that they are in some way apprentices. It is so hard to communicate a calling. My mother's a healer, as Amy said earlier, and she's the 2nd generation of healing, and she has tremendous knowledge when it comes to medicine and plant. And she told me one day that her hands were blessed by the greater being. In our languages, mandani bolexan Dios to lesion. It's the blessing that the greater being, or the gift that the greater being has blessed your hands to do here in life. I guess you could say it's your calling. So it's not her as a person, as human, that heals people. It is this gift through the knowledge of plant that heals somebody. And she said, you came back to your community and to your art because the greater being has blessed your hands to do what you do. It's not your passion. It's not anything else other than this is what you're here to do. That I cannot communicate it to anybody. But what I communicate is the integrity and the cultural value. That I think it could be inherent to the next generation. And that's my hope when I think about continuation. I have 2 boys, especially the smaller one. He loves to draw. He's always drawing. He's always making things. He was making a bird, but instead of using a pencil, he used a yarn. So they don't specifically are oppressed or pressured to learn the weaving, although I teach them, but I want them to be free to imagine. And I think that's how the tradition can preserve. And here's another design.
We have in the house tonight a fellow named Bruce Began. Stand up, Bruce. Hello?
Oh,
Textile Museum is in the house. And I wonder if, Bruce, you might comment on the breadth and the incredible depth of knowledge that these artists, these textile artists have about from whence they've come and where perhaps their society is headed, is often woven right into the piece.
Well, certainly, your guest is at the highest level of artistic weaving, design, and knowledge of dyes. And this is an art form that is so labor intensive that whether it's rugs or textiles that are functional or textiles as art, it's awfully difficult to scratch out a living because, as you heard, he can spend one half of a work year just on, 950 hours, 1,000 hours, on one piece. One quite beautiful piece.
Mm-hmm. With a whole lot of other families,
So,
yeah, relying on it. This has been wonderful, and, just thank you so much for this treat. Did you enjoy it?
absolutely.
So, I do have a question, Porfirio. Tell us about how you're marketing your work, how you're selling, where you're selling, where's your customer, what does your
National
customer
Gallery.
want?
We should say
Yes.
we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces.
So there's some hung on
Seven.
here.
We have the natural, all natural, sheep come in many colors in the front. We have the indigos here. We have the, we forgot the name of that, green,
That's indigo overdye with pericol.
purple,
Yeah.
purple. And then these very, well, one is very similar to the one you just showed. The one on the right, yeah?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So here's
But
a good
other
start.
than here, I mean, this is, other than in this beautiful space.
You know, that's a great question because it makes me think. It makes me think. And other great questions that sometimes it's challenging, but it gives me the opportunity to think. Like, who am I talking to? Who are my customers? Those are great questions. And it is places like this. I either had the opportunity to sometime maybe do a truck show, humble, small place into a beautiful place like this. I'm actually doing a show beginning of the year in Dubai. And, but it comes down to,
Now tell us about that. That's a big leap, and that's something.
so much of the work that you see here, again, are the more functional work. A lot more work that you don't see here, and hopefully one day we'll get to do a solo show.
Mm.
So much more of the work I'm doing is conceptual work that engages the kind of conversation. Amy said earlier that our head is our house.
And you said it before I said it.
And because these great question, another question earlier on the table here, said, because I said I was indigenous, and the question was, how much do you consider yourself as indigenous? Because you spend now 25 years of your life in United States. Others have said, does your work still holds the cultural tradition? Because you're now in Southern California, you speak other languages, you dress differently. Those are absolutely, I'm grateful for those questions because it makes me think and it gives me opportunity to address them. And how do I address them is by creating art. So I started a series of work that's called Continuous Line because within understanding of meaning of continuous line and the contemporary art world is creating a drawing from start to finish. You never lift the pencil off the paper. When I think about my culture and the tradition, our tradition lives through us and continues where we go. We take it where we go. It does not stay on the other side of the border, meaning our head is our house. The tradition evolves and being preserved through us where life journey takes us. So this is a body of work. Two of them is actually coming back from Buffalo. Another piece, it's exhibited at the United States Embassy in Mexico City. I don't know what else, there's a couple of those, but they're framed, they're embroidered pieces, and it's a conversation that finds life in a body of work. Meaning the decision that it's made on this body of work, it is look into the conversation and it could find its life in many mediums or where it could land. And those are pieces that I get to show. A couple of those pieces that I'm showing in Dubai. Another body of work that's called Diaspora. It talks about migration in an indigenous context. And it is the same question because every day or often I am reminded here in this country that I'm an immigrant. And this notion of this statement of go back home, to me it is more of a question. How can we celebrate? But who is actually an immigrant? That's my question. Where am I standing in time and history? What's my role? I'm trying to find and celebrate my identity with everyone. So I started a body of work that explains that. It's actually one of those pieces was exhibited at the Smithsonian Arts and Industry Building, a part of the exhibition called The Future. Another piece that's coming back, or just came back from a textile museum in the Netherlands. Basically what I did is I woven a wool white canvas, then I dyed the canvas, and some parts is painted to create movements. Then I used the butterfly tradition design, the design you see here in the center. We call this a butterfly. I use that as to conceptualize the idea and using the butterflies, but the monarch butterflies, because they could illustrate the vast of migration and the need of migration to save their species. The design was neo-felted in the piece. So they find their way in a technique or material to communicate the conceptual. So those are some of the work that gets to be exhibited in
It's an
galleries.
exciting work.
And normally there's series of work that, so a couple of them is, or my most recent work, that's what's going to Dubai in the beginning of the year.
Really awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.